The 10th of May 1968. A Shau Valley, a Chinook burns on a jungle ridge, its crew stranded, and every pilot in I Corps knows the math. 12,000 pounds of wreckage plus enemy mortars equals certain loss. Then the radio crackles with 3 words that rewrite the equation. Hook secure. 18 minutes later, a CH-54 Tarhe lifts the entire carcass rotors, fuselage. 5 crew straight up through 4,000 feet of monsoon cloud. The flying crane just turned salvage into victory. Every commander in Vietnam learns the same iron law. Terrain and enemy fire set immovable boundaries. Broken vehicles stay broken, downed aircraft become graveyards, heavy guns never move faster than a convoy crawls. The jungle swallows what it touches. Mobility dies where roads end. Commanders plan around this constraint because no helicopter on Earth lifts 10 tons through hostile fire until 1966, when Sikorsky delivers one that does exactly that. The CH-54 Tarhe, designated S 64 inches civilian trim, enters Army service in August 1965 with a single radical design choice. Everything yields to the hook. The fuselage tapers to a 10-foot wide stick, no cabin, just 2 pilots in a glass cockpit and 1 crew chief hanging over open air. Beneath them, a cargo hook rated for £20,000 external and £25,000, with the CH-54B upgrade in 1969. Twin Pratt and Whitney T-73 turboshaft engines generate 9,000 horsepower, well above early war Chinook output. Sikorsky builds interchangeable pods. The Universal Military Pod seats 45 troops, the Medevac variant holds 24 litters, and the cargo box swallows a jeep. But the real genius sits in the aft station, where the crew chief operates a rear-facing seat with direct visual on the load, talking the pilots through every inch of clearance. The Army fields the 478th Heavy Helicopter Company at Khe and the 291st working the Central Highlands and I Corps. By 1967, CH-54 seconds rotate through combat, lifting what the war thought too heavy to move. November 1966, Khe in Binh Dinh Province, the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, faces a math problem that breaks traditional artillery doctrine. Firebase construction requires 105mm howitzers on mountaintops, with no landing zones, no roads, and Viet Cong mortars dialed in on every approach. CH-47 Chinooks can lift the gun tube, but the trails, ammunition, and fire direction equipment need 3 sorties, 3 separate exposures, 90 minutes total. Lieutenant Colonel Robert P. Molinelli, commanding the 478th Heavy Helicopter Company, proposes an impossible solution. 1 lift, 1 helicopter, 1 trip. We rigged the entire battery 6 howitzers in 11 minutes per gun. The CH-54 lifts 11,500 pounds, gun, trails, 200 rounds, and crew in the pod. By December, the 1st Cav operates 12 fire bases that exist only because the Tarhe ignores terrain. Firebase Mary Lou, 3,800 feet up on a ridgeline near Bong Son, receives its entire 105mm battery in 4 hours, a mission that would take Chinooks 2 days. The enemy adjusts, targeting the vulnerable hover. On December 18, a Tarhe takes 14 hits from 12.7mm fire, while lifting a disabled M113 armored personnel carrier near the Ia Drang Valley. The crew chief, Specialist 5 James Hocking, calls corrections through sparks flying off the tail boom. The pilots hold hover, the M113 clears the tree line, and Hocking reports the damage 30 seconds after touchdown. 0 hydraulic pressure, 7 fuel leaks, tail rotor response at 40%. The aircraft flies again in 19 hours. Not fragile, but built for violence. January 1968. Khe Sanh Combat Base, in Quang Tri Province. The siege begins, and Marines face a logistics equation that should guarantee starvation. Route 9 from the coast lies cut. C-130 transports take mortars on the runway, and resupply drops drift into North Vietnamese hands. The CH-54 enters as the only aircraft that can hover high enough to evade the worst ground fire while lowering tons of ammunition directly onto the base's bunkers. Tarhe crews deliver ordnance, water, and barrier materials between January 21 and March 30. Chief Warrant Officer 2 Frederick Ferguson, 291st Company, pioneers the technique. Approach high, descend vertically through the mortar envelope, drop the load, climb straight up before the gunners adjust. You don't fly horizontal at Khe Sanh, you drop like an elevator, and you climb like a rocket. On February 10, Ferguson delivers a bulldozer to repair the runway after a mortar strike destroys 2 cone 130 seconds. The Marines clear wreckage in hours instead of days. Staff Sergeant Michael Kozel, crew chief on the mission, watches the dozer touch down between shell craters and radios the pilots. Hook secure, get us out before they reload. The Tarhe climbs out fast. By March, NVA gunners learn to ignore everything except the sound of the Skycrane 2 turbines at full power, unmistakable, and always carrying the load Khe Sanh needs most. While Chinooks haul soldiers, the CH-54 hauls survival. May 1968, A Shau Valley in Thu Tien Province, the region earns its reputation as a helicopter graveyard. Every downed bird becomes a target, and salvage teams face ambushes the moment they touch ground. Captain James Newman, 101st Airborne Division, watches a CH-47 Chinook take mortar fire on final approach and crash land on a ridge. The crew survives, but the helicopter burns, and doctrine says abandon it. Classified avionics now belong to the jungle. Newman requests a Tarhe. The 291st launches before dawn, betting darkness buys them the margin. Chief Warrant Officer 3 Dennis McClendon flies the approach with night vision goggles, a technology still experimental in 1968. The crew chief, Specialist 4 Raymond Cho, talks him down to the wreck using only a penlight and hand signals. The cargo hook clank echoes across the valley. Hook secure, I could see tracers starting. Told Mac we had maybe 20 seconds. McClendon pulls collective, and the Tarhe lifts the burned. Chinook dead engines, the whole carcass, straight vertical. They clear the ridgeline, tracers stitching the air behind them. The wreck sits on a Firebase landing pad miles away, and Army intelligence pulls 3 crypto boxes intact. The NVA recovers nothing. You don't leave $1 million avionics for the enemy, you hook it and you go. Between 1966 and 1971, CH-54 units recover 280 downed aircraft worth $340 million combined. Not salvage, but denial. July 1970. Firebase Ripcord in Thu Tien Province, the 101st Airborne fights a siege that becomes the last major battle for a hilltop in Vietnam. NVA artillery devastates the firebase, and the command decision arrives: evacuate everything or lose it. The problem sits in plain math. 6 105mm howitzers at 4,900 pounds each, plus ammunition stockpiles, plus personnel. Chinooks can lift soldiers, but the guns stay behind unless the Tarhe comes. Captain Bruce Oliver, Battery Commander for A Battery, 2nd Battalion, 319th Artillery, watches NVA rounds walk across the firebase and radios for the crazy cranes. We had 11 minutes between barrages. If the Skycrane couldn't lift it in one pass, we spiked the gun and ran. CH-54 seconds extract all 6 howitzers, ammunition, and damaged helicopters between July 19 and July 23. Chief Warrant Officer 4 Ernest Green, 478th Company, takes a gun on each run, the crews rigging the hooks under fire. Green hovers while the ground team detaches a gun's trails. NVA mortars land close. The crew chief, Sergeant First Class Luis Ortega, ignores the impacts and talks Green through the lift. The gun clears the perimeter. Every gun we lifted was one the NVA didn't capture. That's the only metric that mattered. By July 23, Ripcord falls, but the enemy inherits dirt and shell craters. Every artillery piece, every radio, every item of value flies out on a Tarhe hook. Not retreat, but strategic extraction. 1969. Highway 13 and the three core firebases, the CH-54, finds its second mission: mass casualty evacuation using the medevac pod. The Universal Military Pod, fitted with 24 litters and climate control, transforms the Tarhe into a flying intensive care unit. Specialist 5 Gerald Hartman, medevac NCO with the 478th, works the pod during the October 1969 fighting near Lai Khe. On October 12, a battalion from the 1st Infantry Division takes heavy casualties during a bunker assault, 32 wounded, 6 critical, and the nearest field hospital 55 miles south. Chinooks can lift 15 litters, requiring 3 sorties over 2 hours. The Tarhe lifts all 32 inches one pass, pod attached, and makes Bien Hoa Army Hospital in 28 minutes. I had 6 IVs running, 2 guys coding. We saved 4 of them because we cut the transport time in half. Between 1967 and 1972, CH-54 medevac pods evacuate over 10,000 casualties, with survival rates 18% higher than standard helicopter transport. The difference lives in speed and capacity: 1 bird, 1 trip, critical care en route. By 1971, brigade surgeons request the Tarhe by name for mass casualty events. Major David Eisenberg, 45th Surgical Hospital at Tay Ninh, tracks outcomes. The CH-54 pod gave us golden hour patients who would have bled out in a Huey simple physics: more space, faster flight. On the 4th of April 1972, during the Easter offensive near Quang Tri, a single Tarhe evacuates 24 Arven Rangers from a firebase collapse, all wounded, under artillery fire. The helicopter lands at Da Nang with fuel for 7 minutes of flight remaining. Not medevac, but lifeline. By 1972, the CH-54 flies over 5,000 combat sorties in Vietnam, and the war's vocabulary shifts. Commanders stop asking, "Can we move it?" They ask, "Where's the Skycrane?" The transformation happens in doctrine, not drama. Artillery becomes mobile. Downed aircraft turn into intelligence assets. Casualties arrive at hospitals inside the golden hour. Between 1966 and 1973, CH-54 units in Vietnam lift armored vehicles, trucks, and artillery, pieces from contested ground. Every M113 carrier, every 155mm howitzer, every burned-out tank the Tarhe recovers represents a denial. The enemy captures no crypto, no fire control systems, no classified hardware. Firebase construction time drops dramatically. The 1st Cavalry Division operates more firebases than doctrine says a division can sustain. Mobility transforms into strategic advantage. In 1967, Sikorsky test pilot Kurt Hoberg watches newsreel footage of a Tarhe lifting a downed Huey out of a rice paddy and recognizes the mission he never imagined. "We designed it for commercial logging and powerline work. Vietnam showed us lift capacity changes the battlefield itself. The CH-54 proves so valuable that losses halt operations. When a Tarhe goes down, the Army sends another Tarhe to recover it, the only helicopter in Vietnam that retrieves its own kind." On the 3rd of March, 1971, near the Laos border, during Operation Lam Son 719, a CH-54 takes engine failure and autorotates into a clearing. The crew survives. The aircraft sits intact but unrecoverable by ground convoy. A second Tarhe flies miles to the site, hooks the downed bird, and lifts it to Da Nang. The recovered helicopter returns to service in 14 days. The cargo hook clank. Twice in one mission proof the system rescues itself. Hook secure, we weren't leaving a Skycrane for salvage. By late 1971, as American forces draw down, the CH-54 units become the exit strategy. Firebases that took weeks to build disappear in days. The Tarhe lifts every howitzer, every bunker, every piece of concertina wire. Firebase Fuller near Pleiku, operational for months, vanishes. Guns, bulldozers, material, all extracted before NVA forces arrive. The enemy inherits empty hilltops. In April 1972, during the chaotic withdrawal from Quang Tri, CH-54 seconds evacuate AR-Ven artillery that would otherwise arm NVA divisions. Speed becomes survival. The Flying Crane's final Vietnam mission occurs on the 28th of March 1973, a recovery operation near Da Nang, lifting a destroyed Cobra gunship to prevent technology transfer. The war ends where it began, denying the enemy what they cannot hold. Over 7 years, CH-54 units achieve a 94% mission success rate, despite operating in the heaviest fire zones in Southeast Asia. No documented losses to mechanical failure during lift operations in the Vietnam theater. The airframe proves tougher than the war. The CH-54 Tarhe retires from U.S. Army service in 1991, replaced by no helicopter since carries 20,000 pounds external. The mission disappears with the airframe, and heavy lift doctrine reverts to ground convoy and multiple sorties. Civilian S-64 Skycranes still operate in 2025, fighting wildfires in California, constructing power lines in Alaska, and placing air conditioning units on skyscrapers from Dubai to Singapore. The cargo hook still clanks on every lift. Veterans from the 478th and 291st gather every October in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and the conversation always returns to one question. Why did the Army abandon the capability? The answer sits in budget documents. The CH-54 costs triple the Chinook's rate in flight hour expenses. But the Chinook lifts half the load and cannot extract artillery from mountaintops or recover downed aircraft intact. The trade-off becomes permanent: cost efficiency over mission capability. In Iraq and Afghanistan, downed helicopters burn in place because no bird can lift them. Firebases require convoy resupply, exposing ground forces to IEDs. Artillery moves slowly, or not at all. The terrain wins again, not because technology fails, but because the tool that beat terrain no longer exists. Lift capacity remains unsolved. The CH-54 taught one lesson that every siege, every firebase, and every stranded unit relearns the hard way. When the ground becomes a trap, only lift creates an exit. Lift turns traps into exits. Retriclord can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5.